EC Chit-chatting with ChatGPT. EC. What programming language is ChatGPT written in? ChatGPT. ChatGPT is written in Python. More specifically, it is implemented using the TensorFlow framework, which is an open-source software library for dataflow and differentiable programming across a range of tasks, including machine learning and deep learning. EC. How exactly does ChatGPT work? ChatGPT. ChatGPT, Generative Pre-trained Transformer, is a type of machine learning model that is trained on large amounts of text data using a technique called unsupervised learning. The model is based on a deep neural network architecture called the transformer, which is specifically designed for natural language processing tasks. During the training process, the model is presented with vast amounts of text data, such as books, articles, and web pages. The goal of the training is to enable the model to learn the patterns and relationships within the text, so that it can generate new text that is similar in style and content to the input text. Once the model is trained, it can be used for various natural language processing tasks, such as language translation, text summarization, and conversational AI. In the case of ChatGPT, the model is specifically designed for generating human-like responses to text inputs, making it well-suited for chatbot applications. When a user interacts with ChatGPT, their input is processed by the model, which generates a response based on the patterns it has learned from the training data. The model uses a probabilistic approach to generate responses, meaning that it generates multiple candidate responses and then selects the most likely one based on the context and previous interactions. The output is then presented to the user, and the process continues in a conversational loop. EC. You stated you are presented with vast amounts of text data such as books, articles and web pages. How were the vast amounts of data presented when you stated before that you don't have the capability to crawl the internet? ChatGPT. I apologize for any confusion my previous response may have caused. As an AI language model, I don't have the capability to crawl the internet or gather data on my own. Instead, I was trained on large amounts of pre-existing text data that were collected and pre-processed by my developers. The text data used to train me were gathered from a variety of sources, such as books, articles, and websites, and were pre-processed to remove noise and irrelevant information. The pre-processed data was then used to train a deep neural network architecture called the transformer, which is the underlying architecture of ChatGPT. The training process involved optimizing the parameters of the transformer model to maximize its ability to predict the next word or sequence of words in a given text sequence. This process is known as unsupervised learning, as the model is trained on unlabeled data without explicit guidance on what to learn. Through this training process, the model learned to recognize patterns and relationships within the text data, enabling it to generate new text that is similar in style and content to the input text. EC. In other words, you are being fed with huge amounts of data that is only up to the date 2021, is that correct? How are these vast amounts of data presented to you? Is it a large sequential file or files and you read these files and process them? ChatGPT. Yes, that's correct. As an AI language model, I was trained on large amounts of text data up to the date of my knowledge cutoff, which is September 2021. The data were pre-processed and used to train the deep neural network architecture of ChatGPT. The text data used to train me were presented in the form of large sequential files or datasets, which were processed by my developers using various natural language processing techniques to remove noise and irrelevant information. These pre-processed datasets were then used to train the transformer model that underlies ChatGPT. During the training process, the model learns to recognize patterns and relationships within the text data and encode them in its parameters. Once the training is complete, the model can be used to generate new text based on the patterns it has learned. When users interact with me, their inputs are processed by the trained model, which generates responses based on the patterns it has learned from the training data. The responses generated by the model are not simply copied from the training data, but rather are newly generated based on the input and the patterns learned during training. EC. I see, so your data processing is only as good as what your developers provided you via many datasets it files, am I right? So, it can be garbage in, garbage out. ChatGPT. Yes, that's correct. As an AI language model, my responses are only as good as the data that I was trained on. If the training data is noisy, biased, or incomplete, it can affect the quality of my responses and lead to inaccurate or inappropriate outputs. However, to address this issue, my developers used a variety of techniques to ensure that the training data is of high quality and relevance. They carefully selected and pre-processed the datasets to remove noise and irrelevant information, and they also used techniques such as data augmentation and transfer learning to increase the diversity and coverage of the training data. Additionally, my developers regularly evaluate my performance on a range of tasks and ChatGPT hung